This is a pliosaur, a marine reptile that lived 110 million years ago. It has been turned atom by atom into a rainbow gemstone. His name is Eric, 2.5 meters long, 90% intact, locked in a sealed case on the first floor of the Australian Museum in Sydney. The opal that replaced his bones is worth, at minimum, $25,000. As a skeleton, he is priceless. He almost never made it there. Eric was nearly cut apart and sold as jewelry, and he is not unique. In one specific stretch of Australian outback, fossil hunters and opal miners are the same people. The bones come up rainbow-colored, gem quality, and worth more broken than whole. This is the story of the world's strangest fossil deposit, the laws that allow it to be destroyed, and the people who have spent 40 years trying to save what's left. To understand how a dinosaur becomes a gem, you have to understand where this happens, because it only happens in one country, in two small mining towns, in conditions that exist nowhere else on Earth. The main one is called Lightning Ridge. It sits 450 miles northwest of Sydney in the dust-blown outback of New South Wales. A flat expanse of red dirt, white tailings, and tin-roofed houses, surrounded by mine shafts that drop straight down into the bedrock. The town produces almost all of the world's precious black opal, the rarest and most valuable variety of the stone. For more than 100 years, people have come here to chase it. About 80,000 visitors arrive every year, most of them hoping to find a glint of color in the dirt that will change their lives. Lightning Ridge is also home to the Australian Opal Centre, a museum and research facility that sits at the intersection of gemology and paleontology, and which has become one of the most important institutions in the world for understanding what keeps coming out of the ground here. Roughly 800 miles to the southwest, in the South Australian desert, is Lightning Ridge's stranger sister, Coober Pedy. It's so hot that more than half the town lives underground in old mine tunnels, in churches, homes, and hotels cut directly into the sandstone. Coober Pedy makes white opal. It also made Eric. What unites these two places is what's underneath them. 110 million years ago, Central Australia did not look like this. The continent was lower, wetter, colder, and almost entirely submerged. A vast inland sea, the Eromanga, covered most of what is now the outback. Lightning Ridge sat on its eastern shore. Coober Pedy was somewhere off its southern coast. When that sea finally drained away, it left behind a sediment that, in time, would do something almost no other rock on Earth has ever done. It would replace the bones inside it with precious stone, and it would put those bones directly into the hands of the people least equipped to recognize them. 110 million years ago, the animal that would become Eric was alive. He was swimming in dark, cold water. A small, four-flippered pliosaur, no bigger than a modern seal. Long neck, small head, a delicate crest running down the middle of his snout. He hunted fish in an inland sea that no map will ever show again, the Eromanga. That sea covered roughly a fifth of present-day Australia, and it sat at a latitude of about 60 degrees south, as far south as Helsinki is north. The continent had drifted into the polar circle, and the winters were long and dark. Geologists know the water ran near freezing because of what they keep finding in the shale: glendonites, strange star-shaped crystals that form only in icy conditions, and rounded boulders dropped into the seabed by what must have been floating ice. This was polar dinosaur country. The Eromanga also hosted Kronosaurus queenslandicus, a 10-meter apex predator, one of the largest pliosaurs that ever lived, which gives you some sense of the scale of what was swimming through this sea. When Eric died, he sank into fine, organic-rich mud within what geologists call the Bulldog Shale, the specific sedimentary layer beneath Coober Pedy where conditions were almost perfectly suited to what came next. Almost no oxygen in it. Without that mud, his bones would have rotted and dispersed. Instead, they were locked in, intact, and waiting. The transformation came much later. The opal itself formed around 24 million years ago, 86 million years after Eric was already a skeleton. Deep weathering of the overlying Cretaceous clay released enormous volumes of dissolved silica into the groundwater of the Great Artesian Basin. That solution percolated down through the sediment, filled every empty cavity, and replaced the original bone, atom for atom, with hydrated silicon dioxide. When the silica hardened in microscopic spheres of uniform size, those spheres acted as a natural diffraction grating, splitting sunlight into its component colors. That is what gives precious opal its play of color. That is what makes Eric's bones glow. There are two kinds of opalized fossils. In the first kind, the bone has rotted away and silica pours into the empty cavity, a kind of jelly mold. The outside shape is captured. The inside is solid opal. In the second, rarer kind, silica seeps in before the bone decays. It replaces the material molecule by molecule, preserving the internal microstructure of the original tissue. Lightning Ridge produces something stranger still, the only fossils on Earth where the opal is transparent enough that you can look directly into the bone and see the cellular architecture of an animal that died before flowering plants existed. It is fossilization that has somehow become gemology. In 1987, in a working opal mine outside Coober Pedy, a miner's pick hit something that wasn't quite right. It wasn't the usual flash of stone. It was iridescent, bone-shaped, embedded in the wall of the shaft. The miner, whose name was never publicly recorded, knew this was different from any opal seam he had ever cut. He spent the next several days digging the find out by hand, without trained help. In the process, he destroyed several of the most fragile pieces. What he pulled out was roughly 7 feet of articulated, opal-encrusted skeleton. He had no idea what species it was. It had never been described. He did know what the raw opal alone was worth, about 25,000 Australian dollars, and that the skeleton was worth considerably more to the right buyer. He sold the entire find to a Sydney property developer named Sid Londish for 125,000 Australian dollars, roughly 230,000 US dollars in today's money. Londish was the chairman of a property company called Com Realty. He had no scientific background, but he understood that what he had just bought was literally an actual dinosaur, and he wanted it properly reconstructed. He commissioned the Australian Museum to do the work. The job fell to a postgraduate student named Paul Willis. Willis spent more than 450 hours on the reconstruction. The skeleton had arrived in pieces, many of them damaged by the hasty excavation, and he worked through them like a man assembling a jigsaw where the picture on the box had been lost. When he was done, more than 90% of the skeleton was intact. It was the most complete opalized vertebrate ever found. He gave it the working name Eric, after the Monty Python song Eric the Half-a-Bee. Inside the ribcage, Willis discovered something else. There were gastroliths, small, smooth pebbles the animal had swallowed deliberately to weight himself against buoyancy. And among those stones were a dozen tiny vertebrae that were also opalized. They had once belonged to a fish. The fish was Eric's last meal. Willis named the fish Wanda. The species was later formally described by Dr. Benjamin Keir and his colleagues as Umoonasaurus demoscyllus. Umoona, the Anticaringia Aboriginal name for the Coober Pedy region. Demoscyllus, a Greek combination meaning of the people and sea monster. Taxonomically, Eric belongs to the family Leptocleididae, a group of small-bodied plesiosaurs that managed to survive long after their larger relatives had vanished. It turned out he was also the last surviving member of an entire broader family of pliosaurs called the Romaleosaurids, all of whose relatives had disappeared 60 million years earlier in the Jurassic. Eric was a living fossil, even when he was alive. Then, in 1992, Sid Londish went broke. Com Realty had gone into liquidation, and Eric was now an asset on the bankruptcy ledger. The receivers placed him up for sale by tender. Almost immediately, the wrong kinds of buyers came forward. Jewelers, dealers, private collectors from around the world. Several of them were open about their intentions. They were not interested in a complete pliosaur skeleton. They were interested in breaking it down into the gemstone material it was made of and selling it piece by piece as opal jewelry. The Australian Museum wanted Eric, So did the country's other major institutions. But the asking price was beyond what any of them could fund on their own. By every reasonable measure, the most complete opalized vertebrate ever found was about to be carved up for engagement rings. What saved him is one of the strangest fundraising stories in Australian science history. The ABC, the country's national broadcaster, was running a science program at the time called Quantum. The producers heard about Eric, understood exactly what was at stake, and launched a national campaign on air. They called it simply Save Eric. Newspapers picked it up, television picked it up, radio picked it up. Akubra, the iconic Australian hat company, signed on as a corporate sponsor, and the campaign reached its most unexpected audience: children. School groups across Australia began running bake sales, raffles, coin drives, and class fundraisers. Kids who had never heard the word pliosaur before were sending in pocket money donations to keep a dinosaur in a museum they might never visit. By the time the campaign closed, more than 500,000 Australian dollars had been raised, most of it from ordinary households, a meaningful portion of it from school children. In 1993, Eric was acquired by the Australian Museum in Sydney. The species name Dr. Keir's team would later assign him, demoscyllus, meaning of the people, is a direct nod to that fact. The donations made his name. He sits today in the Westpac Long Gallery on level 1, sealed inside a transparent case. 2.5 meters of rainbow skeleton, with Wanda still inside his ribcage, on display every day of the year. He is, in a literal sense, a public dinosaur. The public bought him. Eric is the success story. He is not the rule. Under Australian mining law, an opal miner owns the mineral rights to whatever turns up inside the boundary of his registered claim. That includes opalized fossils. The bones do not belong to a museum. They do not belong to a paleontologist. They belong to whoever pulled them out of the ground. And what a working opal miner most often wants from a piece of rainbow-colored material is to sell it. We know this because it has happened over and over for more than 100 years. In the 1980s, an opal miner named Bob Foster was pulling bones out of his mine outside Lightning Ridge. He and his family routinely smashed them open, looking for opal inside. Eventually, he loaded what survived into 2 suitcases, took a 450-mile train ride to Sydney, and dumped them on a museum curator's desk. The curator recognized them on sight. They then sat in storage, undescribed, for the next 3 decades. When paleontologist Phil Bell finally examined them in 2019, he was looking at 4 animals, an adult and 3 juveniles, of a previously unknown iguanodontid. It was the first dinosaur herd ever found in Australia. They named it Fostoria dhimbangunmal, after Bob, and after the Weewarrasaurus word for sheepyard, the land his mine had stood on. Foster smashing his own bones is not the worst part of this story. The worst part is that the smashing is normal. Weewarrasaurus pobeni, a dog-sized plant-eating dinosaur new to science, was identified in 2018 from a jawbone. An opal dealer named Mike Pobin had found it inside a bag of rough opal he had bought from miners. He had no idea what he was carrying. Steropodon galmani, the first mammal from the Mesozoic era ever found in Australia, and a critical clue to the origins of the platypus and the echidna, only survived because the Australian Museum agreed to pay 80,000 Australian dollars to buy it from 2 opal dealers in 1984. Shortly after, Lightning Ridge gave up a second Mesozoic mammal, Calicodon richii, a species so strange that researchers initially nicknamed it the hot cross bun animal for the shape of its molar crowns. Together, Steropodon and Calicodon sit alongside Obdurodon, a toothed prehistoric platypus known from other Australian deposits, in painting the earliest picture we have of how monotremes evolved on this continent. Every one of these is a near miss. How many bones have been thrown back into mining tailings, ground at the lapidary wheel, or quietly sold overseas? No one will ever know. Jenny Bramall, the paleontologist and gemologist who lives at Lightning Ridge and runs the Australian Opal Center, has spent years working alongside miners to change that math. Her position is simple. If it weren't for the opal miners, with their sharp eyes and their respect for the strange things they find, we wouldn't have any of this at all. There are also structural efforts underway. Australia's Cultural Gifts Program allows fossils and natural history objects to be donated to public institutions in exchange for significant tax deductions, one of the few legal mechanisms that can make it financially rational for a private owner to preserve a specimen rather than sell it. It doesn't always work, but it is part of the framework that people like Bramall are trying to use. That is the trade. Australia gets the most beautiful fossils on Earth. The price is the ones that never make it out. So what do we actually have? We have a window, narrow, jewel bright, and absolutely unique, into a polar Australia that no other rock on Earth has preserved. Most of what we know about life on the southern edge of the world 110 million years ago, we know because somebody was digging for gemstones. The dinosaurs, the marine reptiles, the early mammals, the fish in their last meals. Lightning Ridge alone has produced more Cretaceous mammals than the rest of Australia put together. There is no equivalent deposit anywhere else. And we have Eric. He still sits in the Westpac Long Gallery in a sealed case under controlled light. 2.5 meters of opal that used to be alive. The opal in his bones still flashes blue and green when you walk past it, the way the seabed's silica spheres still split the gallery's spotlights into their component colors. Wanda is still inside his ribcage, where she has been since the day she was eaten. The species name is still demoscyllus, of the people. If you stand close enough to the case, you can see something quietly remarkable. In several of his vertebrae, the opal is transparent. You can look directly into the bone, all the way through to its internal architecture. The cellular geometry that grew, hardened, supported a swimming pliosaur in a freezing sea, and then waited intact through the entire age of dinosaurs, the entire rise of mammals, the entire human species. All of it still there, viewable in stone the color of stained glass. That is what a fossil can be in the right rock. 110 million years ago, a small four-flippered pliosaur swam in cold water and ate a fish. 24 million years ago, silica found his bones and turned them into a gem. In 1987, a miner found the gem and almost destroyed it. In 1993, a country full of strangers bought him a permanent home. Eric is the version of this story that worked. The mines at Lightning Ridge are still operating. The bones are still coming up, and every one of them is a choice.